having the opportunity to play a role in that bit. So I'm looking forward to the conversation on the panel, and see how it goes. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much, Rahila. Also, glad to see that you're also an advocate of, how can we work together in harmony to achieve the end goal. We all have the same end goal, which is, electrification for the greatest number of Nigerians. So very, very glad to see we're aligned on that. It looks like Bolade has been able to join us. So Bolade, would you mind giving us your opening statement, please?
Okay, thank you very much. And can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Yes, and thank you very much for the invitation. And one of my favorite topics is basically talking about renewable energy and minigrids and a lot of it. As you well know, we are operating probably the first minigrid in Nigeria, which was inaugurated in. And so our minigrid at Bamu Bamu was commissioned in February 2018. So it's basically been operating for about just over 2 years now. And then you had a community of under 4,000 population. Now the population is well over 6,500 in almost over 600 households. So the community has really grown, and we've been racing to continue to meet the demands of that community.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Bolade. It looks like we lost you again. Obona, if you speak to Bolade offline, would you maybe check if he can dial in with his phone in case that might be easy? I think there's also a phone number he can just call directly to avoid the internet connectivity issues.
Yes, I'll get in touch with him. Thank you.
Okay then, all right, thank you. So we'll move ahead and we will give the mic back to Bolade when he's able to join us. Apologies for that. Okay, so I want to go back to Commissioner Musliu now. So you've already expressed your overarching support for minigrids and see them as a part of the overall solution. So I wanted to ask you, how important do you think they're going to be in the future? And given where they are today, having achieved some level of scale, some fledgling scale, I would say, but having not really taken off. What factors do you think have slowed down their adoption, and how do you see this changing moving forward?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much for the question. As I expressed earlier on, I personally believe that to achieve the objective of sustainable energy for all, there will be a need for a mix of off-grid and the grid. And currently we have about 60% energy access in the country, which is divided along 86%. And currently we operate a grid of around 4,000 megawatts. Of course, we have availability of about 7,000, 8,000, but could actually be more than that if the GENCOs are incentivized to actually ramp up their capability. So looking at that scenario, it is important for us to know that given the limitation in the distribution and transmission network, even if you have the capacity, you might not be able to will it to some of the areas that need this electricity. And on that basis, it means that we need an off-grid or what is called distributed generation, of which mini-grid is one of them. I actually would not want us to focus only on the mini-grid, but to look at the off-grid solution in general, because when you look at the way mini-grid is defined in the regulation with a maximum of 1 megawatt, if you really want to industrialize an economy or in some areas, 1 megawatt may not be enough. That's why it's important we look at distributed generation or off-grid solution in entirety. But as per the mini grid, at least in some areas, that energy required is not really much. I think it's important that we also recognize that mini grid can be used to power those areas. And I say the penetration of mini grid to even increase in the nearest future, in the sense that looking at the current surface-based tariff, where we say that you increase tariff or you charge this on the basis of the supply reliability in every cluster. If a disco has a problem in getting energy world to an area by TCM, such a disco can easily collaborate with mini-grid developers. We have an example in the case of Abuja Disco. They are partnering with a firm in Wuse Market. And currently they are in discussion with Rocky Mountain Institute to also look at how interconnected mini-grid can be used in order to supply some of their customers better. So we need to look beyond the grid solution and also try as much as possible to focus on the off-grid solution while also not neglecting the grid solution. And it is based on that basis that the Commission, instead, in the past, the emphasis has always been on network expansion plan, that the distribution companies are asked, and TCN are asked to submit to the Commission, looking at what they project for their expansion in the next 5 years. But in recent times, the focus has also tilted towards performance improvement plan, because we so much believe that it is when you are able to serve the people that have been connected properly that we can really make sense out of expanding access to currently unconnected areas. So personally, I believe that mini-grid and generally off-grid solution, we have a role to play in achieving the energy for all initiative. And last year I was in Ghana. Ghana, as at then, had achieved about 85% energy access. It was through a mix of mini-grid solution as well as the grid solution. So definitely there are areas in this country that it's not viable for the distribution company to run wire over tens of kilometers to certain villages. In such villages, it will be important to have an off-grid solution, of which mini-grid can be one of. So that's my response to the question.
Thank you so much. A lot of nuggets of wisdom there, and I hope we can unpack some of them. So I'll move on to Rahila, because you mentioned the concept of isolated mini-grids as well. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of interconnected mini-grids, do you think the market is ready? And do you think there are any potential dangers to the growth and sustainability of the actual grid with the emergence of interconnected mini-grids? Rahila, you're on mute.
Yes, I just unmuted. Well, so if you look at the in terms of the market, if you look at Nigeria's Sustainable Energy for All Initiative Action Agenda, the population living without energy access should drop from 60% that it was in 2015 to about 10% by 2030. That tells you that there's a huge market. If you also look at the daily report that comes out from the National Control Center in Osogbo, it puts peak demand forecast that's about 28,450 megawatts. If you look at what we are getting today in terms of what we are meeting, it's just under 5,000 megawatts. So that shows you that there's a huge market in terms of how interconnected mini-grids can partner with the distribution companies to supply that power. So there are thousands of communities across Nigeria today that are currently underserved by discos. Some of them are not even connected. They receive unreliable power. If you also look at the recent service reflective tariff regime, which is by hours of supply, it's also indicative of the fact that there's a supply gap. All demand, all the load that is required is not met. So that in itself creates the opportunity for interconnected mini-grids to operate. So I guess for me, in a nutshell, if you look at the levels of the low levels of reliability, you look at low levels of planned investments, and you combine this with the attractive existing load profiles that we have, then clearly this sets the market for both isolated and interconnected mini-grids. That's why I agree with the commissioner that we should not just be looking at off-grid. So interconnected, which is on-grid, would go a long way to meeting that supply gap. You also have, for example, GIZ, used through the Nigerian Energy Support Program. It's piloting the development of interconnected mini-grids in Nigeria through its interconnected mini-grid accelerated scheme in collaboration with Rural Electrification Agency. So definitely, when you look at this energy access gap, if you look at the demand, over 28,000 megawatts, and the fact that today we are only meeting 5,000 megawatts, it tells you that there's a huge market for that. Now, again, when you talk about, I think your second question was about potential dangers, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. The potential dangers to the grid itself from the emergence of interconnected mini-grids.
Well, I don't see a danger at all. Like I said, there's a huge market. So because there's a huge market and the distribution companies now with the service reflective tariffs need to improve supply from one band to the other, it's a question of collaboration. So you have to have different schemes and different strategies of trying to meet the supply needs of your customers. You have areas, for example, within the distribution franchise area where, like Commissioner Musliu said earlier, when they submitted their expansion plans, there was no plan to include such locations. That you would look at off-grid and say that, you put out, perhaps they can put out different lots and have mini-grid developers come and bid for those. But also there are areas within their network which they could look at and say, you know what, I need to partner to be able to supply this category of customers. They could island different parts in their network based on different criteria. It could be based on the frequency of it could be based on interruptions. It could be based on the level of investment that is required. It could be based on the losses in that area. So, for example, if you have an area where it's a high loss, a mini-grid developer, interconnected mini-grid developer can come in there to say that, well, if you give me this whole area, I'll supply, and at the same time, I can take responsibility of perhaps reducing the losses in that area. So there'll be different schemes that will have to there'll be different schemes to be discussed between the mini-grid developers and the distribution companies to be able to meet these needs. So where I stand, I don't think there's any danger. I think there's a huge market. There's great potential for collaboration, and it's a win-win situation where you have mini-grids getting their returns if they make the investments in interconnected mini-grids. And for the discos, you have them reducing their losses, and then they have happier customers who will be willing to pay when their supply improves over time. So I see no dangers. The only concern, I guess for me, I would like to point out here is developing projects that are bankable. So that would be the only challenge here. Can you develop a project that is bankable? And when we talk about bankability, it's talking about the ability of a project to really sustain itself by its own stream of revenues and paying for all its expenses. So if that is checked, then I see no danger. I just see a lot of opportunities for that market, the off-grid market, to grow, and then a lot of augmentation of the on-grid markets for discos to improve supply, and for mini-grid developers to be happy with the investments and the projects that they're developing.
Thank you for that. I really love the optimistic viewpoint. It's very refreshing to hear. So I'll move on to Bolade now. So Bolade, so you actually develop minigrids. So I mean, I would love to hear your viewpoint on this discussion that's been going on. So do you have any experience with interconnected minigrids? Have you interacted with the discos? If so, what has been your experience? Have you kind of seen this willingness to collaborate? And where do you think this potential partnership is headed moving forward?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for your invitation. I'm very glad to be here. One of my favorite topics that I like to talk about is about isolated and interconnected mini-grids. Just a very, very quick introduction. We are operating, we installed probably the first mini-grid, isolated mini-grid in Nigeria in February 2018. It's been running for more than 2 years now. And it's running very well. The village has expanded from about a population of about 4,000 to about 6,500 now. And our connections too have increased also. Right now, we're in the middle of developing an interconnected mini-grid, and we're doing it in the Benin Disco territory. It's in a community called Kajola. So they do have a grid which doesn't work, of course. Most of the cables are damaged and all that. And so we're currently rehabilitating the distribution system. And then we're going to come in with the power plant that's going to be providing a solar power plant, solar hybrid, that's going to be providing the electricity for the community in Kajola. My experience so far has been that all over the country, both isolated and interconnected mini-grids are very, very important. It depends on the customers that you're serving. For example, I know of a company in, I think it's in Kano and some other place where they're providing electricity for a market there. So it's an interconnected grid, and the people in the markets are either they are metered or they pay a flat fee on a regular basis for the electricity that they're enjoying. We are looking at a place where Benin Disco is a provider of electricity, but they're not getting more than a few hours of electricity a day. So connecting with them, we'll be able to fill up the gap by providing from the outskirts of the community, providing electricity that's going to be coming from a solar system to provide for that community, and they're also going to be metered. So both are very, very important. It depends on where you're serving and what you're trying to serve. And the mini-grid developer that's delivering electricity to Wilson Market, for example, is doing exactly that. And we are going to try to do also exactly that. I'll stop there for a moment.
Thank you so much, Bolade. I'm really curious about your experience in Benin. It sounds like you were able to structure a collaborative partnership with the disco there. So I was just wondering, how you achieved that. Was there any concern at all from the disco in terms of potentially, taking away some of their potential customers, even though they weren't currently being served by the disco, of course? And how did you manage that? Like, how did you align the interest, or was it, pretty clear cut once you came to the disco with a proposal?
Well, we approached them, and we told them exactly what we were planning to do. We had some meetings with them, and then we had also neutral organizations that arranged us to have meetings. We had presentations, spoke to the MD, and spoke to some of the guys that are in charge of their operations. And during the dialogue that we had, we found that well, there are some things that we can help with, and there are some things they could also help with. And so it was, we had a common objective to provide electricity for that particular community. I think also because they had areas that were probably more densely populated and where they could actually have better collections without having too much investment, we are willing to yield some of these communities to us for us to go in there, but with the agreement. So we rehabilitate their existing distribution lines, and then connect our own lines to it to provide electricity into the community, also with our own independent generating power.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. So I'll take back to Commissioner Musliu, and I think this is a good point to do so. So in this case that Bolade has described, so he was able to structure, a smooth collaboration with the DISCO, and the DISCO was, focused on, serving those already connected, as you initially also mentioned. So I'm just curious, what happens in the future when the DISCO, they have sorted out the customers currently and connected, and they're now trying to expand, but maybe they're already in a partnership with an interconnected mini-grid provider, and they're now looking at this potential pool of customers that they could be serving. But of course, they've already entered into an agreement. So is there a tension there? And how would you advise mini-grid developers looking to develop these interconnected mini-grids to think about, potential source of tension, like looking into the future?
Okay, thank you very much. That's a good question. My advice would be for the potential mini-grid developers who are entering into partnership with the DISCOs to also seek the approval of the commission in getting permits. If you look at the mini-grid regulation clearly, there is a provision for takeover or continued partnership with the mini-grid developers in case of expansion of network by the distribution area, even if it is it's currently an isolated area. So when you get a permit, there are certain things you can actually leverage on. There is a provision for potential takeover. There is a provision for continued partnership. So if a DISCO is going to take over, there are issues of paying for the scrap value of your assets. There are provisions for giving you some computed revenue equivalent of your previous year revenue as compensation in case you have to leave, in addition to paying for the scrap value of your assets. So I don't personally see big danger in terms of what may happen in the future, because more especially to developers that are currently entering into partnership with the distribution company. At the onset of this marriage, definitely there will be terms and conditions governing their current operation, as well as what defines the relationship they will have with the distribution company in the future. So that's essentially important. The developers should make sure that their investments are well protected. And as I said, one way of having your investment protected is to try and apply for permit from the regulator so that you have it, because there are certain things that are checked. And at the end of the day, once you have that permit, it means that you are more or less a licensee of the commission. Definitely the commission will definitely protect your investment in line with the subsisting regulation. Let me briefly speak to the question on possible danger, which was asked earlier on. As Ms. Raila said, I don't really see much danger to the operation of mini-grids or any off-grid solution in Nigeria, because there is high potential demand, as he said. The only issue that we are faced in the grid operation, one of it is the issue of pricing, which I think it has been largely addressed in the mini-grid regulation. If you look at the telecom sector, of course, there is a difference between power sector and telecom sector, but there is something we can actually learn when it comes to the pricing. If as at the time MTN came to Nigeria, the price was over-regulated to the extent of not being able to recover the cost of their operation, today we wouldn't have had the competition we have in the telecom sector. Glo wouldn't have come. Some other providers wouldn't have come. So, and I think that as one of the factors that will definitely improve or increase the penetration of mini grids in Nigeria, because based on the regulation, there is flexibility in the area of pricing. Is either you go bilateral or you come to the commission for certain approval, of which the procedure is different, completely different from the grid market pricing approval system. More so, this mini grid or off-grid solution can be seen to be following the kind of mechanism or the system that the telecom followed, because when telecom came, it wasn't a general access. The access was given to some areas, the pricing was right, the investor was able to recoup money and was able to lend, to borrow money from financiers, and was able to now expand access to many other places. I think if mini grid developers or any off-grid developers look at that, I don't think there are really potential risks to their operation. And I think mini grid or off-grid projects can easily benefit from that less regulated pricing system in the subsector.
Thank you for that. I really like the example you used with the telecoms providers. I think that really illustrated things. And so you mentioned the tariffs and, seeing how because of, a liberal market structure, we were able to attract, competition and more market participants in telco. So would you say that now that Nigeria is moving towards a more liberalized tariff structure in the energy space, so would you say you expect to see an explosion in terms of investment, in terms of market participants? Like what do you see on the horizon for us as a country?
Yeah, thank you very much. Currently in the power sector, there are many challenges, but I think pricing is one of the issues as we begin to transit to cost recovery tariff, which we've actually kickstarted by now by the introduction of a service-based tariff. I think there will be a lot of changes. Of course, the issues are not going to go away immediately or overnight, but it's a journey that has been kickstarted. For instance, the introduction of service-based tariff means that when you charge me, definitely I must get value for my money. You can supply me 4 hours and you expect me to pay the price that the regulator has approved for people getting 20 hours of supply. What that means is that these schools will be incentivized to now invest in their network to be able to charge that tariff. And as part of the tariff process, we started working with the discos on their performance improvement plan, such that they identified the areas where they need to make certain investment on the order. And the commission is concluding the evaluation of that performance improvement plan. And the commission is also setting a framework in place for the monitoring of the performance improvement plan, because we don't want a situation whereby it remains a proposal that is never implemented. As I said, there are other few issues in the sector that are being addressed both by the regulator, the policymakers, and the players. But pricing is very, very important, and it's essential for us to move this market forward. And we have tried cleverly to now tie the pricing with the quality of service so that people don't just pay for what they don't enjoy. So I expect that in the next few months or years, we will definitely see improvements in the quality of supply. But that doesn't mean that overnight, everywhere in Nigeria, we get 24 hours. It has to be gradual. Like the telecom case I cited the other time, even though there are differences between telecom and the power sector. But when you look at it, when MTN first came, there were cities like Lagos, Abuja, and a few other places that first of all got access. People in my village then didn't have access, but as time goes on, because the sector was seen to be viable, there were a lot of investment that were made, Then we had another competitor coming in and so on, and access gets expanded. So in terms of the reliability of supply, first and foremost, some area, as Ms. Rahila mentioned the other time, that discos are expected to move customers from one band to the other. To do that means that you invest in the band and you get them to getting more hours of supply. Such investment will be gradual because it's not that you take the whole of a franchise area overnight and you invest and you have all of them getting 24 hours. It is practically impossible. In economics, they say resources are always limited. And even if you have the resources, it takes time to put substation in place. It takes time to run type 3 kV line from one location to the other and so on. It takes time to really reinforce your network. But if we are able to sort out the issue of price, and we are able to sort out some other salient issues that are affecting the sector, I so much believe that in no distance time, we will begin to see rapid improvements.
Thank you for that. I really hope so too. As a Nigerian consumer, it would be great. But yeah, I definitely understand the path to sustainability doesn't happen overnight. Okay, so moving on to Rahila. So let's bring it back to minigrids for a second here. And we talked a lot about interconnected minigrids. So I wanted to get your thoughts. Are there any nuances in terms of isolated minigrid projects within the DISCO franchise area? So do you have any specific commentary to add regarding isolated minigrids?
Sorry, you were not clear. I think it's my...
All right, no problem. I can repeat myself. So I was asking on isolated mini-grids. So do you have, or have we, okay, we lost Rahila for a second. So let me move on to Bolade and I'll come back to Rahila once she manages to. Hello?
Yeah, hi, sorry, the network cut us off.
Okay,
yes,
no
you were saying.
Okay, so I was asking you, do you have any specific nuances to draw out when it comes to isolated mini-grid projects within DISCO franchise area? So we've spoken a lot about interconnected mini-grids, and I wanted to check if you had any specific commentary to add in terms of isolated grids.
Well, in terms of isolated mini-grids, obviously, there are currently several pilot and commercial isolated mini-grids installed and operational in Nigeria, supported by the government partners and the REA through its Energizing Economies initiatives and funded through the Rural Electrification Fund. The World Bank and the African Development Bank, for instance, through the Nigerian Electrification Project, are also upscaling the deployment of isolated mini-grids and solar home systems for rural electrification through a combined facility. So when you look at isolated mini-grids, what comes to mind is social impact. You know, how it will improve the living standards of rural communities or areas where they had no access, but now they have access, so they have to improve healthcare in that area. The children would use bulbs rather than using candles. That can be a fire hazard. It will help the women rather than going for firewood to cook. There's electricity. So looking at it in terms of isolated, when something is isolated, then you begin to look at what the social impact there would be. And you find out that there's a lot of subsidies, grants that go into isolated mini-grids when it's isolated. Now, when you come onto the grid, the question is, I guess, if you are on grid, is there a potential for isolated mini-grids within a distribution franchise area that is already covered, for example, by the grid expansion plan? They're supposed to submit a 5 years grid expansion plan to the Regulatory Commission. Now, if you look at the performance improvement plans of the distribution companies, the idea is for, and then of course you look at the service reflected tariffs that you have now and the different bands of different hours of supply. The distribution companies might decide to segregate their network in such a manner that they decide that certain parts of their network they can isolate. So you have one or two discos where they have high levels of rural customers, not necessarily R1, which are on the lifeline tariffs, but even within the R2 areas, you have customers that you can actually fence off or island off your network and it to be isolated. So you have a conversation with the mini-grid developer to ring fence that area and take it out of my franchise area in a sense, in terms of ring fencing, and provide power to those customers. It could also be that it's too expensive to have certain class of customers on your network, and they are not able to afford 30 naira per kilowatt hour. They are providing very high losses for you as a distribution company, and you can partner with a mini grid developer to isolate such area and provide solar home systems in support, being supported by Rural Electrification Agency and all the grants we're getting, they're getting from development partners. So I see a potential for distribution companies to also introduce isolated mini grids within their franchise area that it's already covered in their expansion plan, but they have had a second thought about it in terms of the level of investment that will be required to extend the grid. As you know, for some of these customers, the load required or the demand they need is very little and may not justify the level of investment that the distribution companies may need to make to improve supply in those areas. So I think first thing first, the distribution companies will have to develop strategies of how to supply power to different customers, moving them from one band to the other. So for those in band E who are only getting 4 hours supply, the question would be that, well, do I need to, what more investment, how much is the investment in this band to move them to band D for 8 hours? So can I partner with mini grids to interconnect, or should I ring fence and isolate part of those customers, because there's no point having customers that provide you, that they have very little need for energy, and the cost of service to them is so high. So it won't be a straitjacket, I would say. So in terms of power supply and the different bands that have been created, distribution companies will need to sit back and really look at the nuances of their customers and see those that they can, partner with mini-grid, isolated mini-grid developers, or off-grid on-grid mini developers to augment the power supply in areas that currently are having unreliable supply, or perhaps they don't even have supply in the outskirts of their franchise area.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I would like to add to, Commissioner Muslim talked about pricing, and I think pricing really is a big issue. It has been a big issue since privatization in 2013, where you hear about, we've heard so much about, cost reflectivity. There's no cost reflective tariffs. There's no cost reflective tariffs, and then you begin to wonder about the issue of tariffs when you compare on-grid supply and off-grid supply in terms of the level of tariffs that they pay for the consumption. So today you have a tariff structure whereby there is an inherent cross-subsidization between customers. That in itself poses some challenges in terms of how the tariff is structured, where you have, so for example, in band A, for example, you have band A, B, and C. You have tariffs there that are today at a cost-reflective tariff from what the regulator has issued, but you have in the other bands customers who are paying much lower. Now the question is, serving those customers is at the same cost in the sense, in the real sense. You know, we look at it by kilowatt hour, and we're looking at the investments you are making. If you're in band A, the tariffs are categorized along three customer categories. They are all paying the same tariffs, but then you're going to use the same level of effort in the other bands, and those other bands are paying less. So this issue of cost subsidization, which has been enhanced by this service reflective tariff, I see as a challenge. And I mean, it'd be great to have Commissioner Musiliu speak on that perhaps later on as to, you see in the Electricity Act, you have a requirement to phase out or reduce or remove cost subsidization completely. But then with the service reflective tariffs we have today, there's a high level of cost subsidization amongst them. But when you go off grid, you have customers paying between 150 naira to 250 naira per kilowatt, although their consumption is very low and they are subsidized and they have grants. Fair enough. But the gap between the tariffs for mini-grid development and on-grid is so wide. So that tells me that, you know, there's room for more. However, we have to consider service. Today, you have 60% of customers not metered. So yes, you can say that there's a problem there, because if you have meters, if you have customers not metered, then the willingness to pay a very high tariffs is much lower, because they don't feel that the energy they consume is being accounted for. Just wanted to throw in that little pieces of, just to corroborate what the commissioner was saying earlier, that, you know, tariffs, when you talk about tariffs, there's a lot of complications around it and a lot of issues that needs to be discussed. But what I particularly like about the service reflected tariffs today is that at least you have sight of what tariffs will be in each band. So in that manner, there is, when you go and have conversations with mini-grid developers, then there's a tariff you're looking at. So if I'm looking at customers in band D and E and I want to improve supply and move them to band C, there's a tariff to take. Unlike before, you will have to go do the back and forth with NERC and, you know, saying, oh, this is the tariff they want. But today you don't have that with the service reflective tariff. If you want to move them to band C, there's a tariff there. So what you need to negotiate with the mini-grid developers who want to interconnect with your grid, or even isolate, but within those band areas, you have a tariff you can negotiate and have a conversation around it. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahila. There's so much there. And since you called Commissioner Musiliu, I guess we have to go back to him for a second before we move to Bolade. So you asked him some questions regarding the tariff. So I'll just give him the floor to comment on the tariff and the issue with metering, getting consumers to agree to pay more when they can't really see and necessarily agree to what they are told they're consuming.
Okay, thank you. And then thank you, Mrs. Rahila. I think you've raised a very important question. You've raised a very important point. And I would like to start from the issue of cross-subsidization. When you look at the Act, clearly the Act mandates the Commission to phase out cross-subsidy across various consumer classes. And the service-based tariff, essentially, if you take it, fees the previous tariff regime, you will see that the level of cross-subsidization has significantly reduced. And I will tell you, when you look at the tariff to be paid by industries, the industry, their tariff before was probably around 45 on average, 45 naira on average. And the average tariff for the residential was around 30 to 32 maximum average for the nationally. So currently that gap has been reduced significantly from what it used to be, because now the tariff is now designed across the level of reliability. But I quite agree with you that regardless of whether a customer gets 4 hours, 8 hours, or 20 hours, the kilowatt hour, the price per kilowatt hour, or the cost of serving kilowatt hour is the same. I quite agree with that. And that is the area you probably inch your point on, that if you look at that, it seems that service-based tariff may have really, one of the challenges with the service-based tariff may have been that. But you also mentioned the issue of metering. First and foremost, reliability is very important, and that links to the experience as per off-grid operation. In off-grid operation, whether mini-grid, you have high level of reliability. And that could probably have been part of the things you can say has gone into the pricing. You have reliability, consumers or customers getting roughly 24 hours of service. When they need it, they get it. And of course, the economies of scale also played out in terms of in determining the price, the right price for mini grid. But in the grid subsector, you have a situation whereby people don't get 24 hours, some people don't get 12 hours, and some people don't get even 8 hours. The question they will now be asking is that, how do you now expect me to be happy to pay for such a service? I quite agree with you that regardless of the hours of service you get, 1 kilowatt hour is 1 kilowatt hour in terms of the price. But the biggest challenge, which you also mentioned, which I personally have, is the issue of metering. If a customer is metered and such a customer gets 4 hours, at the end of the day, whatever kilowatt hours that 4 hours translates to into customer consumption is what that customer pays for. So regardless of whether you get 4 hours or 20 hours, will not really matter much, because the kilowatt hour you get at the end of the day, the price should be the same thing. So, but as I said, this service-based tariff was actually based on the feedback we received from consultation, and at the same time, what we observed. Because until you are able to roll out metering speedily, you may not be able to really put that argument forward. But I think it's a conversation that we have to now begin to really sensitize people that regardless of the hours of service you get, the cost of 1 kilowatt hour is the same thing. But we are only trying to make sure that, given the reality of today, let's now make sure it's a way of nudging the distribution or the players in the sector to actually invest more. When you say you can't charge more than this if you don't give so hours of supply. So there are basically issues of incentivizing the operators, and also there are challenges of metering, which you have rightly highlighted. And what the government is doing on that, first and foremost, we put in place meter asset provider. There were challenges because of certain policy and the unexpected COVID-19 pandemic. Now COVID-19 pandemic is going on, and the government has also waived the 35% charge on imported meters. And also the president has equally directed the CBN to intervene in making sure that the deployment of meters is speedily done by supporting the procurement of meter in bulk, using both local manufacturers as well as any other alternative to ensure that the Nigerians are speedily metered. So I agree, but in terms of comparison with the previous regime, I think the service-based tariff has done better when it comes to cross-subsidization, because we are mindful of the provision of the Act. And that's why when you look at what the industries will pay compared to what other people will pay, there has been a reduction in terms of the differences.
Thank you, Rahila. I hope that answers some of your questions. You had quite a few. Yeah, thanks for
but like I said, there will be more discussions around this, and
of course.
But whatever process you put in place is never perfect. The idea is that you put it in place and then you correct and make changes to align with the realities of how the industry is moving. Yeah, thank you.
Great. So let me go back to Balade for the last question before we open it up to the audience. So we talked a lot about collaboration. You yourself mentioned AEDC collaborating with a minigrid developer. So when you look at your company, Rubitech, and you're looking at avenues for growth, are you looking to collaboration as a main avenue from which you will grow, or are you looking more to deploy isolated mini-grids, just kind of working alone? So where do you think the growth is going to come from, and what are you doing at Rubitech to prepare?
Okay. First of all, let me just thank you again for inviting me to this forum. We are currently working in two areas, isolated as well as interconnected. And in every case, since we started with the isolated mini-grid in Bamu, we've always looked at ways of cooperating with other people, collaboration. And if we start off with Bamu, which was commissioned in February 2018, we have recently looked at some collaborations. You must have seen some of it in the press. The one that we did with EV vehicles, electric vehicles. So EV charges their motorcycles, electronic motorcycles, in a mini grid in Bamu. And they deployed to start off with about 10 bikes. And since then, they've seen a massive growth in the number of people in the villages that want to ride on those bikes, that want to hire those bikes and then use it for transportation. Because Bamu, by normal vehicle, is about 20 minutes from the main road. But within the community there, they're already using those electric vehicles, and they charge them at Bamu. And we have there a meter that also meters them, so we know how much of the power is going into those electric vehicles. Now, looking at the interconnected side, we are in a place called Kajola, which is under the Benin Disco franchise. Long before we decided to move into interconnected, we actually had some meetings with the management of Benin Disco in Benin. And then we were looking at a different location before we finally arrived at Kajola. And we discussed everything that needed to be known. We looked at what the regulation says, and it seemed like it was acceptable to both parties. So right now in Kajola, we're in the process of developing the infrastructure for the supply of electricity to the community. So we are rehabilitating the distribution lines, and we are going to also be installing the power plant, which is going to be a hybrid of solar as well as diesel generation. So basically, that's where we are. We are interested in collaboration. We always are looking for collaboration because the other party has something that you don't know, or have something that you need, and then you have something that they need also. So we are really looking at that. Now, if you look at other parts of the country, in Abuja, I understand there's also a collaboration there with the AEDC to deliver electricity to the Wuse market. That is happening. And also in in, I believe it's in Kano. There's also something similar to that, not exactly interconnected, isolated mini-grid, but what the provider there is doing, basically providing electricity power for each of the stores there. But then again, they're also at the same time connected to the grid in that particular city. So there are variations of this cooperation, but I think the way the market will move and should move is really more collaboration in these areas, bringing your strengths to partner with somebody else in that particular area to be able to deliver more efficient and more effective electricity in those areas. So right now in our pipeline, as I said earlier on, we've got about 8 to 10 isolated mini-grids that we're trying to develop over the next coming years. And also we have 2 interconnected mini-grids that are also planning to do very soon. So they are both important for our electrification journey. They are all essential. It depends on the area, depends on the customers that you're serving, it depends on what their demands are. And that's what really determines what kind of model you want to bring into that particular area. I'm just going to pause there. I believe there'll be a few questions that need to be answered, and then I'll be able to take them.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Bolade. So I'll just move on to some of the questions. We have some good questions that have been coming up from the audience. So just a note to the audience, if you want to ask your question, you can put your hand up, but you can also just type it in the chat, and then I'll just go through as they come in and direct them to the panelists. So I will start. So the first question actually is for you, Bolade. So just stay on. And this is from Narlene. So she asks, would you mind giving a brief progress report on how is Bamu Bamu performing in terms of revenue, sustainability, probably elements of demand. So maybe give us an idea of Bamu Bamu being the first mini grid that was deployed. So how has it performed?
Well, I did say at the beginning that the population was just slightly under 4,000 when we moved in and installed the mini grid. Then it grew to 4,500. Now we're talking about 6,500 people in the community with about 550, 560 households. And excuse me. And then in terms of revenues, of course, revenues have increased because there are more people. Then there are more productive users. One thing that's essential for isolated mini grids is we need as many productive users as we can get. Well, what do I mean by productive users? People that actually use the electricity not just for a few bulbs in the house, but they use it for their business. They use it to make money. So that means they're greater customers. They consume more electricity than others. So we found that there was a lot more of these people, grinders, millers, refrigeration, and things like that use a lot of electricity. So the community actually grown in commerce, has grown in people, has grown in business, and so many other things, which is very good. And then it makes the community more sustainable. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as they're doing this and making more money, the sustainability balance of the community increases.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So in this example, we have seen how the mini grid has actually served as an anchor to potentially even urbanize. I haven't been to Bamu Bamu, but it sounds like this mini grid has certainly become like a center of attraction, and maybe this is how we can also accelerate the urbanization of the country. So thanks for that. So I'll call on Sam Akinyele Colquick, who has his hand up to ask his question. Ogbona, can you unmute Sam Akinyele Colquick?
Yes, we're working to unmute him right now.
Okay. Okay, so while you're working to unmute him, I'll just move on to the next question from the chat, just in the interest of time. So Ikechukwu asks, he's interested to know how collections for interconnected grid arrangements will work, especially given the lack of metering. So does anyone, I think anyone from the audience, from the panel can actually take this one. how the collections work when you have interconnected grids, especially when the targets are not metered?
Well, I would expect that with an interconnected mini-grid, there will be, in the bilateral conversation, first of all, you would have done some customer enumeration in that area. And I can imagine that whatever area you are given, that there'll be interconnected supply, the distribution company will ensure that perhaps an area that has a high level of metering, and if there's no metering in that area, it should be like a collaboration between different parties. So you have the meter asset providers who have contracts with the distribution companies, and they have a deployment plan in different areas of their network. It could also be that the interconnected mini-grid developer can have a conversation in their negotiation to ring-fence that area such that the mini-grid developer takes on the investment for metering, perhaps, or you have the meter asset provider on the table having this conversation in terms of metering and however it is they do that collection. But at the end of the day, when you are having a bilateral conversation, all this will be on the table to discuss. I do not think that any interconnected grid developer will sign up for this with the risk of not being paid. So I don't think it's a concern. More or less, it's more like it might lead to different strategies of meeting the supply in that area. So if you come in as just an interconnected mini-grid developer, you might end up coming in partnership with someone else who can help in doing the metering, or you can partner with the meter asset provider in that location who has been given the mandate to meter that area. I would expect that is the kind of arrangement you would have. So when you look at the fact that some distribution companies may want to introduce interconnected mini-grids in areas where they have high losses. I've not seen that example. So for example, GVE in Wuse Market in Abuja, there's a market there, they are metered. So I think I'm yet to see where there's an interconnected mini-grid and there's no metering as part of that conversation. I'm yet to see that. That would be my response to that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahila. Sam, have you been able to unmute? Hello, Sam. We can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay, yes. Please go ahead with your question. Okay,
my question goes to Commissioner Osei. I don't know if NERC has any plan for electricity buyback from private generators. We are such in the States a lot, whereby if I generate electricity through, say, solar, I should be able to sell excess back to the disco. Do you have any plan like that? Because this will solve most of the problems, because we have enough generators in the country. Since we don't have enough supply, and we still have to wait till 2030 to have at least about 28,000 megawatts. So if we can do the buyback, so anytime I don't have power, I'm running generator, I have excess, I should be able to sell to the disco in my locality, and it doesn't involve TCN anyway. So it's a local, it's a low voltage wire connection, not high tension, high voltage wire connection.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Sam. First and foremost, I will start by saying that there is no rule or regulation that prevents people from selling back to disco. And I will cite example before I now come down to the level of maybe mini grid or solar, what the commission is doing. I think 2018 specifically, there is a company in Ibadan, British American Tobacco, but they applied to the commission, having had conversation with Ibadan Disco. In fact, it was even Ibadan that brought their application because they had excess capacity, which they actually wanted to sell to Ibadan Disco. So they had a conversation, and after that conversation, they agreed as to the price per kilowatt hour of electricity that will be sold to Ibadan Disco. And they had, I think, 0.5 megawatts that they actually wanted to sell to Ibadan Disco, which eventually the commission approved after the necessary evaluation of the proposal. So it's possible as of today. But the challenge we need to look at is, one, you will need to look at the technical possibility in case the location of your area or your house, maybe it isn't possible for you to, your house is not really located at a load point where they can actually technically get that supply back. But specifically with the mini grid or off-grid renewable, there have been a lot of conversation around having a regulation that actually provides a guide for such a trade. But people have been talking about net metering, of which we initially, we also were aware of, and we are not really objecting to it. But we believe at the commission that what we even need is net billing regulation, not net metering. Because what net metering does is that you have a dual purpose meter that at the end of the day, what you take from the disco, you net it out from what you generated, or you net out what you generated from the disco. The challenge with that is 1 kilowatt hour you inject into the disco, when it gets to where it is going, it's no longer 1 kilowatt hour because there is a loss. So in essence, what kilowatt hour you inject is not really of equal value as the 1 kilowatt hour you get from the disco. So that makes the net metering guidelines or regulation not to be really perfect or proper. So that's why we say net billing will be important, because what I mean in essence is that if you inject 1 kilowatt hour into the distribution network, you need to cater for technical losses. When you get to where it is going, that 1 kilowatt hour may have reduced to 0.8 kilowatt hour. So if you now say at your own point, at your own hand, you take in, let's say, 20 kilowatt hour from the disco, you inject 15 kilowatt hour, and you now net it off. So meaning that you will now pay disco 5 kilowatt hour. Meanwhile, that's your 15 kilowatt hours you've injected is not the same thing as the 15 kilowatt hour you got from the disco. There will be a need to look at how do you account for technical losses, which of course is based on the law of electron. You definitely will have technical losses. So the commission has been discussing the issue of net billing in order to provide guidelines for this kind of trading arrangement. But as of today, there is no rule that prevents you from selling your excess power to the distribution company. If you have excess power, you can discuss, have a conversation with your distribution company and hear them out. If at the end of the day, there's a need for the commission to also participate in the conversation, of course, at the end of the day, there may be a need for certain approval to give regulatory backing to whatever arrangement you may have in place. But I would like to submit that currently there is no regulation that prevents that from happening. But there are issues to be taken into consideration, which essentially the technical issue and the commercial side of the arrangement having to do with how you net off and so on.
Thank you very much for that answer. So I'll move on to the next question from the chat. So I think this is best addressed by Bolade. So the question is, ever since NERC published the minigrid regulations in 2016, there has been slow deployment of minigrids in the country. So what is responsible for the slow deployment? So maybe Bolade, you can talk us through some of the challenges you faced in trying to scale up.
Okay, thank you very much. The challenges of developing mini-grids and scaling them is not a challenge of regulation. In fact, a lot of, we all started without regulation. While regulation was put together, we had already started operating our mini-grids. I think the challenge has to do with the costs of building a mini-grid. First of all, identifying a suitable community for a mini-grid. You've got to do a lot of pre-investment work to do that. And secondly, you've got to find a mini-grid site where you're sure that you're going to get returns on your investments. In other words, not just households, but you also want to see that there are businesses in there. And then thirdly, raising money, having your equity and then raising debt, as well as grants that may be available. That one too can be difficult and also can take a whole lot of time. So those are the real main challenges in the mini-grid development area. However, if there was some help, for example, sites have been already surveyed, and there's a list of sites that people could pick up from. Now, who's going to do that survey? I don't know, maybe NRC, maybe government or something. So, for example, we have a portfolio where we have actually gone to identify potential sites, which we keep until we are ready to invest in them. But of course, if we were able to do more than that, we'll have done it much faster. So it will be good for people to specialize in different areas. For example, specialize in identifying potential areas, specialize in actually building mini-grids, specialize in bringing in the equipment and supplying the equipment also, and so on and so forth. But there have been some innovations. For example, now we have containers that already have equipment connected inside it. It's got batteries, it's got inverters, and it's got battery inverters as well as solar inverters and so on and so forth inside it. So you can actually take a container and plunk it down wherever you are going to need it. It sounds easy, but it's not all that easy to be able to do that. So these are some of the things that help us to be able to build mini-grids faster than we're doing before. Finance still remains a major issue. Banks are not friendly to renewable energy. Okay, they are friendly to people that are buying 5 megawatt generators. You can get that money very quickly. But when you're talking about installing solar in some areas, and it's going to be in a community in some bush somewhere, they're very, very funny about doing that. So those are part of the challenges of doing that.
I guess if I could just add, just ask one thing. A question on that. When you look at what GIZ, Nigeria Energy Support Program, like I said earlier, they are piloting the development of interconnected mini-grids and through a scheme which they call IMAP, that's the Interconnected Mini-Grid Acceleration Scheme. Now, has that been a successful scheme? Because the question being asked that since this mini-grid regulation was issued, you've not seen a proliferation of mini-grids across the country. In fact, in the last report I saw that there are more mini-grid developers that are registered, rather that are under registration rather than permits. So with a permit, obviously it's bigger, about 1 megawatt, and there are criteria for you having a permit. I think Commissioner Musili spoke to that. So I'm just wondering that where is that? Wondering that there is a lot of support from development partners who are providing technical assistance, for example, like GIZ provides technical assistance and they provide grants. They call grant in kind. So what really is the issue? Why has that not seen an increased number of mini-grid developers across the country?
Is that for me? I think that's for Mr. Oseni.
I guess it's for you,
Okay.
Bolade, because
okay, I'm sorry.
You're a mini-grid developer, so I'm just curious, to know why is that? Because there's a lot of, there's grants out there, there's technical assistance out there. So yes, I recognize the financing issue, But then with all these development partners and the different schemes they have, why haven't we seen that progression from registered mini-grid developers to mini-grid developers that have permits, which is on a bigger scale, even if it's small?
Well, I think the challenge has been, first of all, it's to develop a mini grid really does take some time. The process that I mentioned earlier on of identifying a mini grid, of then doing your survey and your research, then building a model and knowing how much you want to build there, and then getting the community to sign agreements with you about payments, and then so on and so forth. It's a long process. It takes time, okay? And then when you look at the financing of it, you've got the grant, you've got the debt, and you've got the grant, the debt, and then the equity. Yeah. So actually coming up with your own equity when you're still to do the investments, well, it's okay. It can be difficult at times, but then to get the debt portion of it can be quite challenging. So it is in the financial area that you spend a lot of time. The work you do before, identifying the sites, identifying the places, raising the funding. When it comes to building, you can build in less than a month. If you got everything together, you can build in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But it is the preparation that nobody sees that is what takes time. Now, until we get a financial sector that looks favorably at this project, even though they may be in the rural areas, then these things will happen faster. So far, there's been a lot of grant and support, right? But we still need that thing that comes from the banks in terms of loan. And then the percentage that you are going to be asked to pay, 20% and so on and so forth, and higher than that, it's not going to work for a mini-grid. So I think, to summarize, the major challenge has to do with the debt portion of the financing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that. So yeah, financing is key. So as much as we have grants, it looks like, there's still a, missing portion of that capital stack that needs to be addressed. So let me take it to Caleb Adebayo from the audience who has his hand up. So Obona, would you mind unmuting Caleb so he can ask his question?
Yes, please. We're bringing him up right now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Caleb, you're on mute currently, so please unmute yourself. I think you've been granted permission.
Okay, great. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good evening. Thank you so much for this program, the 50th dialogue of the Power Dialogue. My question goes to the Commissioner. So it's particularly with respect to the service reflective tariffs. I think I understand the fact that there was that sort of dilemma as to which one to do first. Do we upgrade the infrastructure and then raise the tariffs, or do we raise the tariffs and then upgrade the infrastructure? And of course, the need for investments then necessitated the raising of the tariffs. But then my question is, how is NERC monitoring the DISCOs? I think the DISCOs, for some parts, have gone rogue. And I say this because I've been involved in one of the NERC town hall meetings that were done. I've also been involved in a sort of online, a virtual dialogue by my DISCO, and a lot of complaints were coming from people, and it was boiling down to the fact that the service tariffs have been implemented and people are not seeing power supply. Particularly in my area, a short while after the service reflective tariffs were implemented, we had no power for 3 days. We had no communication from our DISCO. I tried to reach the DISCO, nothing. Tried to reach them via their social media. Till today, they are yet to reply. Now, how is NERC ensuring? I mean, I've heard sentiments in the past and probably currently that NERC is being very soft on the DISCOs in a lot of areas. So how does NERC intend to monitor and ensure that these service reflective tariff bands are kept to? If you're saying as a DISCO, you're supplying 12 hours to this place, what monitors you to ensure that it's 12 hours or 16 or 20? My second question is, are we ever going to get to that point where...
One question, because you just have 2 minutes for the commissioner.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. I think I'll just stick with this. It's the more important question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Adebayo. I think the second question, if you so wish, you can send it to me so I can provide answer. Maybe. So on the issue of monitoring, I would like to start from where you ended, that NEC has been soft with the distribution companies on a lot of things. Of course, that is the way people actually see it. When you talk to these schools, they will say NEC has been hard on them, and also having NEC is soft in dealing with TCN. Then when you talk to TCN will say the same thing. The NEC is hard on them. The NEC is not hard on the discos and so on. But specifically to the question you have raised, there are certainly a lot of several number of strategies we are putting in place to monitor the service. First and foremost, if we have data loggers deployed in some distribution companies where we can easily get real-time information as of today, but the deployment was slowed down by COVID-19 because we still have some other disco, especially in Lagos, Ikeja, and so on. We deploy certain data logger to certain specific location. Of course, when you deploy data logger at let's say 3 kV, for instance, you can have supply on the 3 kV and you don't have on the 11 kV. When you deploy monitoring devices on 11 kV, you can have a service supply on the 11 kV, but you don't have the distribution transformer. Maybe you have several transformers that are connected to that 11 kV. You have supply in some, you don't have power in some. So the commission is already working on several strategies apart from monitoring at the feeder level. There are certain devices we are also expecting that we want to deploy further across the nation. But we are also working on deployment of apps for customers to report outage on real-time or near-real-time basis, whereby you will be able, once you grant access to your location, the feeder that is connected to your location will automatically reflect and will be able to get information as per outage in the area. So we are currently working on the deployment of that. We are working with the World Bank currently. Then the Commission is also procuring certain devices to be used specifically in monitoring the end user supply hours across different service bands in different clusters. So I agree. If there are certain issues you specifically have with your disco, you can actually contact me and we'll follow up from that point. Of course, there is always information asymmetry when it comes to regulation as well as the operation by the market players. But notwithstanding, whatever we can do by leveraging on technology, we are determined to do that to ensure that we are able to get the information real time or near real time. So those are some of the efforts the Commission is putting in place to ensure smooth monitoring of the operation.
I thank you for that. I just had to ask before I wrap up. So does NERC monitor Twitter? Because I find Twitter to be a very effective platform for complaining. So I'm just curious if would complaints on Twitter be monitored by NERC?
Yeah, the issue of Twitter is, yes, we have a Twitter handle and we have some people managing the Twitter currently. But the issue is, when you look at the order that went out, it is not only about getting on the neck or head of the disco to resolve the power outage issue in any area. It goes beyond that. There is a provision for service adjustments that if it is proven that within 2 months, you've not been able to get the minimum number of hours you are expected to get, you automatically, your tariff will be adjusted to the lower band, and also you get credit for the money you may have paid for higher tariff band during that period that you actually had service below the minimum guarantee hours. So if you want to do that, it goes beyond people complaining on Twitter. While you look at the Twitter to quickly be able to get onto the disco and get them resolve the issue, you also need something that can be proven that discos cannot really challenge. And that is where the need for all the devices and other monitoring mechanism is important.
Thank you for that. It sounds like NERC is doing an excellent job, and really has you have your eyes on all the potential issues. So I trust there will be a seamless transition. So with that, I think we've come to the end of the panel. We've gone a little bit over, but it was such an engaging discussion, which I really enjoyed. Hope everyone that attended enjoyed it, and thank you so much to the panelists for dedicating your time. So I'll give everyone about 2 minutes for closing statements, and perhaps we can start from Bolade and then go the other way around.
Well, okay. My closing statement is basically to look at, just make one or few comments about the future of minigrids and isolated and interconnected minigrids. I think the future is huge. I think the opportunities are huge. I think when you look at the number of communities in Nigeria that have still not been connected, or that are still not having any form of electricity whatsoever, then we are not going to do this in our lifetime. What drives me mostly is the fact that there's so much opportunity out there putting smiles on people's faces in the communities all over Nigeria. And I would love it if more people joined in, as well as having maybe some special grants available for minigrid developers to be able to turn these things faster. It's taking too much time to develop one minigrid. We need to do it faster. We need to find a way of deploying quickly. We need to be able to operate at scale. And then I think the future will be brighter. Thank you very much for inviting me, and very happy to be here to learn also a lot from both Rahila and Mr. Osenitu. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bolade, and for bringing in that human angle that we often lose sight of. So moving on to Rahila for our closing statements.
Yeah, I mean, this has been very, great discussion. A lot, especially hearing Bolade talk about his projects. So that's been quite interesting. I think for me, the market is huge. If you have over 28,000 megawatts of peak load demand forecast, it shows that, and then we're at 5,000 megawatts, it shows that there's a huge market to be filled. More importantly is the fact that the distribution companies today have performance improvement plans, which the commissioner mentioned earlier that they're evaluating. They need to meet up with. They'll be held accountable for the performance improvement plans they've put forward. And part of that is to ensure that they provide supply to customers. And in doing so, they will have to devise different distributed energy solutions, which minigrid is a part of, to see how they can match those different supply needs. So I think it's important that minigrid developers are proactive in trying to understand these performance improvement plans of the DISCOs by engaging with them, having the conversation, and to also not come onto the table as just minigrid developers, but also as partners who can also go further by being part of metering, billing, and collection, taking some risk in the business to improving the performance in that particular location. I see more DISCOs being open to arrangements where you have minigrid developers coming together with partners that are willing to put money, not just like I think Bolade mentioned earlier, where they are reinforcing distribution networks to allow for that integration to happen. More of that conversation going on, and there's no any other way. If there are 5 bands, there is 4 hours to 20 hours to reach. So I know for sure that for distribution companies to be able to meet that performance requirement, they will need to partner with minigrid developers in various forms. to make those improvements over time. And that would include, of course, potential investors in the mix as well, who are able to put money down for improvements in the assets. So I think with that, the future is bright, as Bolade would say. I think most people are frustrated. It's 6-7 years after privatization. We don't have 24-hour supply. I think everybody's on the fast lane, but it takes time. Everything takes time. In a market that, yes, is 7 years, but it's still new. I mean, there's a lot of things that needs to be done. For example, developing a contract market is key to so many potential opportunities being leveraged upon. So yeah, we all need to stay optimistic and try to see the positive side and work together with everyone in the market, government, private developers, the utilities to focus on providing this electricity that is key for economic development. On that note, thank you very much, Neka. Thank you for inviting me for this panel. It was great having a conversation with every one of the panelists and hearing their views. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rahila, ever the optimist. So yeah, I hope we can all adopt your viewpoint looking into the future. Commissioner Musli, I'll hand it over to you for your closing statement.
Okay, thank you very much. It has been a productive discussion and very educative. I would just like to say that, first and foremost, speak to one of the issues raised by Bolade regarding site identification. The Commission is currently working with RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, to see how site identification can be done, whereby a situation whereby you have somebody who already identified the potential area for mini-grid development and now provide provide access to developers to actually online or real-time basis to be able to identify the potential area they want. I know that GIZ, as was mentioned maybe by Ms. Rahila, actually did something. They mapped some potential mini-grid areas in I think about 3 or 5 states. So, but we are looking beyond that so that at the end of the day, working with the DISCOs and that Rocky Mountain Institute, we are able to grant access to potential mini-grid developers to actually know without having to go to stress themselves to know the potential area where mini-grid can easily be located. So having said that, the issue of financing and so on, I think one thing we need to understand, which all of us we need to understand, is that which may actually help us in making more frantic efforts to ensure that penetration of mini-grids as well as of other off-grid solutions improve rapidly, is that we need to look at our objective and probably refine it in some way and shape the conversation along that. Whereas we understand that in developed countries, the seal towards renewable energy is actually basically because of their desire to have a zero carbon economy. But in our own case, we must understand that our objective goes beyond that, and it centers around access, reliability, and security of supply. Maybe if that is at the forefront of our conversation, we may be able to get the buy-in of government as well as the buy-in of every important stakeholders, including the financial, the banking sectors, and so on. So we may have to be shaping our discourse or discussion around that, rather than looking at it from the angle it is being looked at in the West, where they fully concentrate on the renewable as a means of ensuring zero carbon economy. So once again, I thank you for inviting me. It has been a very productive discussion. And I would like to say that if developers or anybody needs the support of the Commission, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us.
All right, thank you very much. With that, we've come to the end of our panel discussion. We've discussed a lot of different topics. I think the overarching key takeaways that there's an openness to collaboration, certainly from NERC, from the discos, from the mini-grid players. And when great minds come together, then we can definitely achieve great things towards our ultimate goal of, electrification and bringing access to the people. So I'm personally looking forward to seeing how this market takes off and how we tackle some of the issues. There's still issues, but step by step we'll get there, and we're already taking steps in the right direction. So thanks again to our panelists and to everyone for taking time out of their day to join this discussion. And I wish you all a great evening if you're in this time zone, or wherever you are. A great rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Inviting us.
Hold on. Thank you. Before you go, thank you very much, panelists, for joining. And thank you very much, Mecca, for your fantastic time management. So it's just,
Awesome.
good to finish right at this time. Yeah. You're in a hurry to leave, Rahila?
No. I thought it was just...
Okay. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have everyone here. We had some polls and we saw the results. Just because of time, I won't read all the results, but we have that all the results really align with everything that has been discussed here. So it shows that we're all saying the same things. We're saying, this collaboration is really important at this time.
Yeah.
So we look forward to this kind of collaborations in future. So once again, if you haven't subscribed to our newsletters for podcasts and all these for the dialogue and everything, please do. This is your first time joining us. We usually send out reports and flashcards and all these materials just to keep these things going, keep these conversations going via our social media channels and all through these other platforms that we use. So don't forget to subscribe. We'll be sending out the communique, all reports on this particular dialogue. And please feel free to ask any other questions, send it through us to all our platforms. We'll send them to each of the panelists, depending on who you direct it to. So once again, everyone, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and have a wonderful evening. Bye.